Alrighty guys, so this is a commercial I recently shot at a property with all glass windows as all the external walls, which can make it extremely difficult to light for a commercial. However, thankfully I had my Nanlux Evoke 1200 and this is actually the first commercial I used it on and it worked out freaking amazingly. I'm so stoked. So today I'm going to be going through a lighting breakdown of the setup and kind of like showing you how you can light an extremely bright environment as well. How's it going guys? My name is Andrew Murphy from Down Under in Gold Coast, Australia. So the reason that I chose this particular location for this commercial was because it had like absolutely freaking stunning views. It was absolutely amazing. But also I knew that I had the Nanlux Evoke 1200 and I knew that 1200 watts would be enough power to actually overpower the outside light and keep everything exposed properly. So firstly, when you're actually choosing a location for a shoot, be very aware of the shots that you're actually going to be capturing and the equipment that you have access to. Now I definitely could have shot this commercial without the Nanlux Evoke, but all the windows, all the outside light would just been completely blown out, or like been very, very bright, and it just wouldn't have looked super professional. Now in Australia, I reckon we have some of the harshest lighting conditions around when it comes to like a clear blue sky, but thankfully 1200 watts output from the actual Evoke itself was enough power to actually overpower that at 100%. Alright, so let's jump straight into it. So this first scene, we have basically like our main talent at the kitchen sink, and he's installing the product that the commercial is all about, and then washing some vegetables. So the first thing I did was set up the shot, and then actually set my exposure to the light source that I can't control. So for this instance, it is going to be the sun or the outside daylight because you can't control that. And once we've dialed in our settings to actually expose for this, this is going to be like our base, and then we can start building on top of this with the lights that we bring in. And I'd say this is the key to getting like professional looking cinematic footage. Like if you set your exposure for the light you can't control, you're not going to have blown out highlights. And like if you look in films and stuff and like really professional work, there is never ever blown out highlights. So keep this in mind. Then once we've actually set up the exposure in camera, we can start bringing in our lighting. Now, the key to getting actual like natural looking lighting is to place your lights where light sources, I guess, are already coming from. So don't try to compete with light sources by placing them on the opposite side of where the actual like natural light source is coming from. So if we break down this scene, we have a light coming from behind our talent, and we also have light coming from the left of frame. So I set up the Nanlux Evoke 1200 to the left of frame, and this is going to be our key light, and this was set at 100%. And at first I did put the 150 centimeter octabox on there with the diffusion as well, but then we actually found out that the diffusion actually cut too much of the light and it just wasn't bright enough. So I ended up just taking off the diffusion and using the actual like, I guess like shell of the octabox to really shape the light and focus it forwards. And then I also noticed as well when we were setting it up, the light was just slightly off because it was, I guess like, it was early morning, so it wasn't, I guess, 5600K Kelvin temperature light. Like it wasn't full daytime sunlight, so we did have to put a quarter CTO on the inside of the light to try and match the color temperature from the outside light to the actual 5600 Kelvin output on the Nanlux Evoke. Then to the right of frame behind our talent, I added the Nanlux Forza 300B with the Fresnel lens, and this was used as a hair light, and it was used to simulate the light coming from the window that was behind him. And then finally I added in my Nanlux Mix Panel 150, and this was at 100% as well, and this was purely just a fill light, and you can see just how much light you actually need in an environment like this. Like typically 150 watts of power is a pretty decent amount of light if you like in a typical interview setup. But if we compare it to obviously the 1200 watts coming from the Evoke, 150 watts is basically nothing, and even at 100%, it basically was just enough fill to go like bring it up and not have it completely black. Now one thing I also did to obviously help with the scene was I pulled down the blinds in the areas that we weren't actually like seeing on the sides of the scene just to get a little bit more shape into the image, because obviously if we just left those open then we're just going to get light coming from everywhere and it's going to be really hard to shape our subject or shape our image. And this basically works kind of like having a negative fill in your scene where it's going to actually take away light. So you can see like in this scene right here where I'm talking to you, you got light on this side and dark on this side. That is because there's no light source coming from this side, and it's kind of like there's no light bouncing around as well. So we get a light and a dark side, which adds shape to our image. Now honestly, when I saw this image on my camera screen, I was like friggin' blown away by how good it ended up looking. And like this is straight out of the camera as well. Like there's no color grading, no anything. It just looks so freaking good. And I've actually never worked with such powerful lights before on a commercial. And I've found it just opens up so many more possibilities for working in like difficult environments. Right, now jumping over to the second scene, we were in the laundry, and this one was a little bit more difficult to light for a few different reasons. So this is the final lighting setup that I ended up going with in the end, and I'll go through why. So again, the first thing we need to do is obviously expose for the outside light so we don't blow out any of the highlights. Then we can start adding in our key light. Now again, we need to look where the light's coming from. So the left of frame, there's obviously windows there, and there's actual natural light coming from there as well. So that is where we're going to try place our key light. Now because the actual laundry was like this white area and didn't really look, it was hard to kind of like add shape to white walls. I end up putting the key light or the Evoke behind my talent a little bit, just so we got like kind of like some shadows and streaks onto that wall, again just to try to add some depth to it. And we were originally going to set up the Evoke on the ground and then boom it right up, but the light stands that I had weren't quite tall enough, and it was going to be a little bit hard. So there was actually like this little ledge around the outside which we managed to place it on, which worked really good, and it meant that we could get the light source as close as possible to obviously get the most amount of output out of it. And for this, I just used the 45-degree reflector that comes with the Nanlux Evoke to focus the light onto the scene. Now ideally it would have been good to have, say, like a slightly wider thing. I think I did like a 36-degree one. That might have been better, but I don't have access to that, so I just had to work with what I had and make it work. So once we had our main lighting setup, which again was at 100% to balance for the outside light, I added in that mix panel 150 again as our fill light. Again, that was at 100%. Then I added in a Forza 300B as a bit of a kicker, I guess, for our talent when he was at the washing machine. So all I did was just basically bounce this up into the ceiling, roughly in front of where he was. So if he was standing like this, I'd make sure the light source was coming from here, so it was landing on his face here. And ideally, I would have loved to have like some sort of mirror or some sort of reflector or something to bounce the light in a little bit better, but I didn't have access to any sort of mirrors, and also we didn't have much time to set this up as well, so we just had to make do with what we could. And then for this little area onto the right of frame, again, white walls, not very interesting. I just added the Forza 150 through the projector mount and just added this kind of like slit of light just to, again, break it up and add some shadow and highlight areas to this pretty boring wall. Now this scene I am actually pretty happy with. It is like a little bit flat, mainly because that laundry nook is all white, so the light that we're actually bouncing in or shooting in is just reflecting off there and boosting up all those shadows and not giving us too much contrast. But again, sometimes you just have to like work with what you've got and the time that you've got allocated for each scene. And then finally for this bathroom scene, the Evoke actually ended up being used as a hair light purely because the space that we actually had to shoot in was a bathroom, extremely tiny, and it wasn't possible to get the Evoke inside there with enough space to actually like shoot in there as well. So instead the mix panel 150 came out again, and this time it was used as the key light, and this was literally like a meter away from the subject at 100% just to actually like get enough light to work as a key light. And again, this shows just how much light you actually need if you're shooting like a wide interior scene and trying to expose for the outside light as well. Then we also just added in a little bit of fill light with just like a small 15x power tube. Again, limited space, so we just threw that in there just to kind of like kick it up a little bit so it wasn't completely black. Now overall, I am extremely impressed by the performance of the Nanlux Evoke 1200. I am working on my full review of this, but I've been waiting for the Fresnel lens to arrive before I do like my full review. It actually just arrived the other day, so I will be starting to work on that very, very soon. But anyway guys, I hope you did enjoy this lighting breakdown, and I hope it gave you some sort of insight into, I guess, like how to light scenes where you have so much light already and trying to compete with in this kind of environment. But if you did, then consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and if you want to find out more about the products that I used in this video, I'll leave them linked down below. Otherwise, stay creative and just be you. Have fun.